By the time I turned 30 years old, I had lived in as many places as years I was old. 30 different beds I called, that's my bed. And I'm not talking about hotels for the night. That was where I lived, and my place was there. 30 different places.
I don't have a lot of friends, and I'm in my late 30s now, and it gets lonely sometimes. You don't have people that you've been around with for so long that you're fully rested around them. With people I meet now, I always have to have my guards up because I don't trust them fully. I've not been around with them for so long.
Yeah.
And I don't want my kids growing up that way.
The third culture kid experiences multiple deaths at a very young age. And it's not necessarily that people are dying, but things that are familiar and comforting are taken away more often than kids who don't.
But how do you balance that with the constant call of God telling you, okay, fine, this season is over, let's move?
Growing up as a third culture kid, my wife and I both had to say goodbye over and over and over again to people who we'd come to love and call friends, and then they left. And some people we would never see again.
Have you ever thought, my life would have been a lot easier if I didn't have kids?
That's a dangerous question, especially if your kids watch this podcast, huh? The honest answer is
now to the crux of fatherhood. When I first met you with the idea, you were quick to tie fatherhood to manhood. Why was that important?
yeah. Obviously, not every man becomes a father. However, it is built in that a man could become a father. Now, as I understand it, and this is from a biblical theology of manhood, which I'm convinced is the way to understand life in general from a biblical perspective. But fatherhood is rooted in manhood because it is the design of God who made man. And in the same way that you don't cut boards with a hammer, nor do you hammer nails with a saw, when a man is functioning according to his design, he is happiest. Right. He's doing well because he's acting the way that he was made to act. Now, again, that's not to say that if a man does not become a father, he is somehow,
Incomplete.
useless or incomplete, but rather to say that his identity and his responsibilities are defined outside of himself. They're not self-contrived. They're not self-defined. And that flies in the face of today's thinking, where I'll decide what I am and what that looks like. Or I'm going to define it according to what the most popular movement is in the culture. But instead, when we root it into an eternal design that God has predetermined for us, it's actually quite liberating to know, what am I supposed to be doing? And so every man has a purpose and a design according to God, and so if fathers don't know what men are supposed to be, it makes it difficult to know what you're supposed to be doing as a father. Fathers are absolutely essential to a healthy and thriving society. They're an essential building block to that society, yeah, that's my answer for now.
You were born in America, in Colorado, I believe, but at some point you found yourself in Latin America, and then now you're raising kids in Italy.
Yeah.
So give me an overview of how that journey happened.
So my parents were potato farmers. Planned to do that for forever, I guess. And that's my heritage, is agriculture. My grandparents and great grandparents, everybody had occupations that were agricultural. I'm the first one in my family not to farm, and so my father knew that the Lord was nudging him towards being involved in world missions, bringing the gospel to other places in the world. And he had gotten his private pilot's license as a hobby. I believe my mother signed him up for lessons, and his father had flown, and his uncle had flown, and so it was something fun to do. But a organization that is a flying organization and has work all over the world contacted him and said, "Would you have any interest in flying small aircraft into dangerous places to bring the gospel?" And those are my words, not the organization's, but that's essentially what the question was. And after a few weeks of consideration, they said, "Yeah, I think this is God calling us to leave everything, sell the farm, and go." And I was a young boy at the time. Me and my two younger brothers. I remember waving out the back window of our van, saying goodbye to the house that my dad had built, and we thought we were going to grow up in, and that's where life was going to be. But we were saying goodbye. And my parents did language school in Costa Rica, and then I grew up for the next almost 12 years doing school and life in Ecuador. It was an amazing experience. I came to know the Lord there, was baptized there, was trained as a leader, and grew to love the Lord and the things that Scripture taught. Um, I met my wife during high school at a boarding school there in Ecuador, and it was a boarding school full of people from all over the place, missionary kids, kids of business people, and diplomats, and there were those who came to our school who had the intention to share the gospel and disciple us third culture kids, and that had a profound impact on my wife and I. So much so that after university, we said, "Let's go back to Ecuador and learn from this ministry how we can do this in places that don't have a ministry like that." In the globalized world we're living in, we realize there are a lot of people who are living in between their home culture and a host culture, and they need to hear the gospel too. So we went back to Ecuador, and that over time we were led to be a part of the local English language church, um, and I began preaching there regularly. I was not the pastor, but was growing in my love for preaching, and with that came the conviction as I was studying the scriptures that I needed to be able to handle the Word of God rightly, um, and so that led to applying for seminary, and I started online while we were in Ecuador, and it proved nearly impossible to do it long distance in those days. And so we said, "Okay, Lord, if you're ready for us to close this chapter in Ecuador, we'll go to seminary and trust you with the next step." And so during seminary, we said, back in the U.S., we said, "God, is there anyone who is planting English language churches who are using English as a tool to reach across multiple cultures with the gospel in global cities? Is there anybody doing anything like that?" And through a process of fasting and praying and asking the Lord, he brought an organization that was recruiting church planters that aligned well with us theologically and philosophically. And they said, "You seem like the kind of people we're looking for. There's an application process, an assessment, but uh, I mean, it was like that week, if I remember right, a church was just launched in Rome, Italy. Would you guys begin to pray about going there and taking over that church because the planter is leaving?" And having kind of all of our experience being the Americas, and honestly, we had no interest in Europe, not even a dream of going there or even vacationing there. Just didn't really care. Um, and so we were invited to come and visit in the church and see what was going on. And we actually visited a few other places in Europe just to see what the need was. And honestly, our hearts were broken for the need for the gospel in Rome. The church was just getting on its feet, and the people needed a gospel preaching leader. And the Lord seemed to indicate that was our family, that we would come and minister here. And so we moved 8 years ago to Rome, and we've since had 2 more kids, 4 in all, and, uh, and man, life's good.
But with kids
Yeah.
come some challenges. I think I've asked you this question off camera before, but I'm going to ask you on camera. In the face of challenging situations that life and its vicissitudes is happening, have you ever thought, "Hmm, my life would have been a lot easier if I didn't have kids"?
The honest answer to the question is yes. Life would be easier without kids, hands down. Would my life be as rich and as good? No. I began to think about that question a lot when I was in seminary, because in seminary, I was doing classes full time. I was working part time, and I was sleeping none of the time. That was how seminary went. And at the end, I apparently passed because I have a piece of paper that says I got through it somehow. They said, "You survived." And um, and through that, as we were having children and raising very small kids with no money and, all the money I made paid for maybe a few groceries and tuition. And then my wife was working on the side to help pay for food. Um, and I remember it had to be a bit of a repeated theme that I would not rather do this experience without my family there. Because coming home at the end of the night when they finally closed the library and you couldn't work there anymore, you had to go home. Um, I was reminded that this is why I'm doing this, is because my family needs to know the Lord. And God has called me to this, not me to this, but not you. It's me to this with you. And I want to do well in seminary so that I can do well for my family, because they need to know Jesus and they need to know Dad is obedient to what God's called him to do. And so, as I watched my, few single guys there in seminary just breeze through their tests and study, and they're like, "Well, what else do I do? I guess I'll go hang out at the movie theater." I don't know what those single guys did. I honestly have no idea what they did, but I knew what I was doing.
Right.
Yeah, it made it a rich time, but certainly there were those moments where I go, "Man, this would be a lot easier, but it would not be better."
You mentioned the phrase third culture kids.
Hmm.
What does that mean?
A person who, or especially a kid, who is growing up in maybe a home where mom and dad have a particular culture of the home, be it a certain nationality or ethnicity or somewhere they came from. Because you can have two different cultures married to each other, but the home will have a culture, right? So that's your first culture. The second culture is the host culture around you. So the nation, the city, uh, even the school that you're at, that's your host culture. That's number two. But the third culture is the one that is born out of the amalgamation of the two and how the child interprets and acts because of that. They create their own third culture. Everything from how they engage the world around them and how they defend against the world around them is their own culture. Now, what they've found is that third culture kids connect over that. They have nothing in common. A kid who grew up in a home that had a Vietnamese and I don't know, Portuguese parent versus a kid who grew up in a house that had completely different parents, American, and they grew up in two different countries. But when they meet, they go, "Wow, you're like me."
Mhm.
And they get along and they tend to just have a great time because they have nothing in common, and that's what they have in common. So that's a third culture kid.
So you basically fit the bill as a third culture kid,
Yes,
and you're raising third culture kids as well.
I am.
So how did growing up as an American kid born in Colorado, taken to Latin America, how did that experience prepare you for raising your kids this way?
It certainly gives me a compassion for my children when they say things or do things that make me realize they're going through the hard things about growing up cross-culturally, growing up as a third culture kid. Um, and that's something that I think my own parents struggled to do. My own father struggled to really relate to what it felt like to be the odd man, the guy that wasn't from this place or from that place. And so with my kids, I've been able to walk with them and really empathize with them and say, I know that that hurts when that happens. But I also get to say, because of the way you're growing up, here is here are the wonderful things about your experience that kids who grow up in a monocultural world can't even conceptualize. Your world is 100 times larger than theirs. It
Right.
doesn't make you a better person, but equips you in ways that you can't even realize now.
Zayn was born in Nigeria, but she was barely 1 when we had to move abroad. And then Asha was born here on the continent of Europe. They have no context of what Africa looks like. And it is even doubly harder because I'm married to a woman we are both from the same country, but we are from an entirely different culture. So she's from northern Nigeria, I'm from southern Nigeria. We speak 2 different languages. So at home, we speak English. And it bothers me that my kids are unable to fully grasp my madrelingua, like the Italians would say. How would you advise someone like myself, who's a grounded African? I grew up African. I was raised African, but I'm raising kids who are African only by skin color. Yeah, but culturally, intellectually, and socially, they are not Africans. So how would you advise me to deal with those?
Um, I believe it's 2 Corinthians chapter 5 talks about how this is not our home. This is not our dwelling place. The tent we're in will one day wear out and be done with, and then we will enjoy our heavenly home. We have an opportunity raising third culture kids, whether they like it or not, whether we enjoy it or not. They get to really experience the the challenge of not being home. Now, I grew up in the greatest place in the world. At least that was my experience. I was a jungle kid. I hardly ever wore shoes. I had my first machete at age 9. I built forts out in the jungle and had monkeys and parrots, and I swam in jungle rivers. It was a little boy's paradise. It was also a place of parasites, and so there were problems too,
Right?
right? Okay. Wasn't all great, but it was wonderful, and my boys hear these stories and they go, "Man, why can't we live in the jungle? This place sounds amazing." And I would love to take them there. If it was up to me, I would be doing ministry from a hut and a hammock in the Amazon jungle because that's my home. I love that place. But it's not where God called me because it was of greater importance to me, the vision of the eternal kingdom that we are fighting for, that we are a part of, than the earthly kingdom that we get to enjoy sometimes. And so if you can give your children a view of what is beyond this life, it helps. It doesn't make the hurt go away. We go, "Man, I just wish my kids could enjoy what I got to enjoy as a kid." But what I want them to truly enjoy is Christ. When I look at my time in Ecuador, it was the place that I encountered God first. And then again and again and again. It's where I fell in love with the scriptures. It's where I came to realize how much God loved me. Ecuador, in my mind, has become not just a playground, but a place where Jesus met me. And I would love to take my sons. I hope to one day
Right?
take my sons back to those physical locations where I can say it was here that God met me on this beach, on this mountain, in this jungle, and I hope to do that one day. But if I don't, I get to point them to the God who is present with them here.
Absolutely. And I'm happy you said that because so I don't know if it happens to every parent, but when I feel like I'm in Rome, Italy, in this season of my life for a purpose. And my wife also agrees that we are here for a purpose. God, because of all other places we could have ended up, Rome wasn't exactly our optimal final destination, right? So in our understanding of that calling, we are content. However, in the last couple of weeks, my daughter has been having some sort of flashbacks of her time in Sweden. Hmm. Then she keeps asking, "Are you going to stay here forever?" And I, as a parent, I'm struggling with that. Because on the one hand, I want to make my kids happy or give them a semblance of familiar environment. But right now, I'm in a situation where I cannot do that.
Yeah.
I saw a video of you and your boys talking about moving to Rome. How did they handle the transition?
Yeah. They were quite young. I mean, they're very young when we moved. Our oldest was 6, about to turn 7, if I remember right, and, our youngest had just turned 3. And I remember so we lived in a RV for almost a year before moving here, and I remember after we arrived, we'd been here a little while, I mean, several months, at least within the first year we were here, I remember our youngest saying, "When are we going back to the RV, huh?" We said, "The RV's not ours anymore, we sold it and we're not going back there." And I don't mean to make this a dark turn, but, one of the one of the things that has been noted of, especially our generation today, and really for the last, oh, I don't know, many years, is, especially in a Western world, we don't encounter death nearly as much as people did in years gone by. Now, I'm trying to remember if it was a quote or where it came from, but it seems like someone said the third culture kid experiences multiple deaths at a very young age. And it's not necessarily that people are dying, but things that are familiar and comforting are taken away more often than kids who don't experience the transitions and the travel and the moves and the saying goodbyes. Growing up as a third culture kid, my wife and I both had to say goodbye over and over and over again to people who we'd come to love and call friends, and then they left. And some people we would never see again. I mean, this last week I was reminded because some friends called us from here in Rome, and they let us know that they're leaving. And it just, in the moment, I knew it would happen eventually. It happens to us all the time. This is kind of the nature of our ministry, is to step into lives that say goodbye all the time, but it always hurts. In the moment, I was a bit like, "Oh, okay, yes, that's logical." But now as I'm sitting here retelling the story, I mean, it's hitting me again because that is the life of the third culture kid. And so you're teaching your kids how to say goodbye well over and over and over again. At the same time, you have the privilege as a father to teach them where is the source of life that will never leave. And whether that's what you want to work on today or not, that's what you get to work on, is to point them to the source of life as they say goodbye over and over and over again.
What if I don't want to? But on the other hand, I feel the hand of God tugging me in a certain direction. Because it almost looks like arrogance. I feel like because someone had me move around pretty often, I arrogantly assume my kids would also want to move around as often. My
Mm.
my dad is a doctor, so he spent the bulk of his life of my growing years living in the doctor's quarters of hospitals because he had to move around pretty often. So in my secondary school, I did, because in Nigeria we have 3 terms. So I did first term in a different school, I did second term in a different school, I did the third term in a different school. That's how often we moved.
Mm. Mhm.
I don't have a lot of friends, and I'm in my late 30s now, and it gets lonely sometimes. You don't have people that you've been around with for so long that you're fully rested around them. With people I meet now, I always have to have my guards up because I don't trust them fully. I've not been around with them for so long,
Yeah.
and I don't want my kids growing up that way. But how do you balance that with the constant call of God telling you, okay, fine, this season is over, let's move?
Mhm. Yeah, that's something that I've struggled with as well. By the time I turned 30 years old, I had lived in as many places as years I was old. 30 different beds I called, "That's my bed." And I'm not talking about hotels for the night. That was where I lived, and my place was there. 30 different places by the time I was 30. This, weirdly, this season where I'm ministering to a very cross-cultural moving people group, uh, we have been the stable ones, and that has been a weird identity shift to say, "God wants me here for as long as he wants me here." That doesn't mean that I every now and then say, "Hey, dear, what do you think it'd look like if we moved to Mongolia?" And she's afraid I'm gonna say that, and it's actually God speaking. And, here we go, and so I try not to do that to her, as a joke. But, A couple of things come to mind. One is the analyzing the sense of needing to go somewhere else, uh, and pit it against there's a bit of a cultural trend today that to move around this sort of wanderlust thing, um, I think is driven by social media experiences and bad pizza and this idea of like, I think, yeah, oh, yep, God's speaking, it's time to go. And I think we need to be really careful with that. One of the things that God convicted me on when I left Ecuador, we went to a place in the United States that I'd never lived before. I didn't know anybody. We had family there. That's why we went there for a little while. My family, my parents were on furlough for 6 months, and so we lived together. I went from being a boarding student, haven't lived at home for 4 years, back to living at home. That was tough in itself, and I didn't know anybody. Jumped into a new church. I really didn't know anything about anything, to be honest. Um, but I didn't like it. Said, I don't like this place. I don't want to be here. I would like to go anywhere else but here. And after 6 months, we moved to Colorado where I was familiar, and my
Mhm.
parents went back overseas and did their thing. That wasn't easy, but it's another story. But when I left that place in the U.S. for what was familiar, God gave me the realization of how cold my heart was to that place. I had not made any friends. I had not invested relationally in anybody. And the weight of the gospel being a relational gospel fell heavy on me when I left. I said, I hope I never leave a place that I've called home and feel nothing again. When when I leave a place, I want it to so break my heart that I weep because of the people that I've come to love here. That's so much better than being a cold person and going, I am indifferent to the people around me. And here's where that comes to bear in the life of the Christian, especially the Christian transient third culture person, is the importance of the local church. If you are a believer, you have a place in the local body of believers. And if you sail in and sail out without any sort of relational investment, you are not doing church the way a Christian is meant to do church. And so for my children, I want them to know that wherever they are, they need to be in relationship with other believers. Knit your hearts together, man. That's what God designed his spirit to do in us, that we have one spirit with other Christians. And so when you have to leave each other, you go, oh, this hurts. But we don't grieve as those who do not have hope. I know a lot of third culture kids who grieve because they don't have hope. Maybe their parents were missionaries, pastors. Maybe they weren't. A lot of them today are not. This sort of side note, this sort of third culture kids study stuff, a lot of it was birthed out of studying children of missionaries because they noticed patterns, especially in those who went to boarding schools. And so this sort of psychological study kind of birthed out of that. Well, today it's everywhere. If you were to round up everybody in the world who is living outside of their home country and culture today, it would be the fifth largest country in the world by population.
Wow.
So, in missiological terms, we talk about reaching people groups, typically defined by a place, a language, a culture, and you go to that place and you learn the culture and the language so you can share the gospel.
Mm.
If we think about bringing the gospel to third culture people, we're talking about reaching the fifth most populous country, if you can call that, in the world. That's what my wife and I have been called to reach that demographic of people, and I think more people need to. So there's my sidebar. But I want my children to see their place in the local church, wherever that is, not because they have some religious duty to that church, but because if they are a Christian, they are knit by the Spirit of God to those people, and they need to feel that, they need to know that. That church needs them. Eventually they'll leave at some point because we serve a missional God. He sends us out, right? And so you're going to go eventually.
Mhm.
But the gospel says we will reunite with those people at some point.
So let's talk legacy. I've been lucky because my father is still alive, so I'm lucky to have an amazing father. Far from perfect, but he's an amazing man. Um, there are good things about my upbringing that I'm trying to replicate in my own household, but there are others I'm trying very hard not to replicate.
Yeah.
So, are there things in your upbringing that you would like to instill as a value in your kids? And are there others that you rather, nope, nope, you've come so far, no further.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things I've been thinking about lately, in part because we've been talking with some other parents in the church, but it is of utmost importance learning to obey the Lord. We obey what God has told us to do, and we learn how to obey God first in our home. And when mom and dad say, "Pick up your room," you pick up your room. Like, that shouldn't be hard. There shouldn't be any negotiating, going back and forth, right? Similar with God, when God says, "Do this," we do it the first time, not the second, third, or after God counts to 10, or whatever the trick the parents use today. Or to obey right away. And I think that's the legacy that I inherited from my parents. One of them was, if God says go, give it all up. To my understanding, the potato farming business was going really well, which farming's not usually a lucrative business. It's a subsistence living at best, and some people do well, and but often they don't. Um, but the business was going very, very well. My father's a savvy business guy. He's good with numbers and business stuff. He's also just a good farmer. He's good at actually a whole lot of other things, but he gave that up because God said go. And I want that legacy to continue in my home and for my children. The other thing I think of in terms of legacy that I want my children to carry with them is the importance of hospitality, because as a kid, I would come home from uh, school and find out that my bed has been given to somebody who came through for a night or two, and I'd be sleeping in the hammock or another bed somewhere, and my room was not mine. And our dinner table was always filled with other missionaries, local people, and the gift of hospitality became such a value to me, especially in light of being a third culture kid and feeling out of place in wherever I am, going, this is not my jam, this is somebody else's. How important it was that if I know and love Jesus, who has embraced me, I'm not righteous as he is, but yet he embraces me. Hospitality is a core value. And I want my kids to, even though they're growing up cross-culturally, also know the value of embracing others, because so often, I have a friend who said it well. We all sit next to our own puddle of tears. We don't always see other people's puddle of tears, but there's pain and there's difficulty going on in that person's life, and if you can be hospitable to them, it shows the love of Jesus in tremendous ways,
All right.
especially when somebody goes, "I know what it feels like to be unwelcome. I know what it feels like to be pushed out and not welcome, and I wanna be that for others." Um, those are things I want to, uh, to be part of the legacy that's in our home for our children, to think of things that I don't want to be a part of our legacy. Um, I would like, as a father, to spend good conversational time with my kids, hearing what's going on in their hearts. And I have to admit, I don't do a very good job at this. It's something I need to do better at. Is sitting down with my children and just asking questions and saying, how are you doing? Because I want them to know that their father cares about them, that their father is somebody that they can go to and talk to about all kinds of all kinds of things. Now, my father didn't do a great job at that, and he knows that. But his father didn't do a great job of that either, and so it's one of the things we've talked about. Is it's partly personality, and really, it's hard to do something that has not been done for you.
Right.
Me growing up cross-culturally, especially in a missions environment, there were a lot of guys who said, "Hey, I'd just like to sit down with you and hear how you're doing and pray for you." And that had a huge impact on me, an impact that would not have happened if I'd grown up in the culture where I was born. And I have to give God glory for that because it's driven so much of my ministry is relationship. And I want that to be something that I do pass on that I have found challenging to have received from my own father, and just to do naturally. So, yeah.
So talk to me about discipline in, because I know you have a teenager.
Hmm. Yeah.
So how is discipline like?
Yeah. One of the cultural issues we deal with today is who the parents are. Are the parents the adults who
How
bore that child, or are the parents the child and allow the child to just
it is.
figure it out, dictate it, and the parents are it behooves them to allow the child to just go, and we will sort of gently nudge them as they find their way in the world. And that's not parenting. It's not parenting at all. That's passive, it is negligent, it is not parenting. And and whether biblical or otherwise, allowing a child who does not know anything about how to survive, figure life out on their own is absolutely negligence, right? So if you're the parent, be the parent. That's why we're doing the podcast, right? So,
Right.
well, but how do I do that? And so discipline is not just corrective, it's formative. You're not just saying, don't do that immoral thing, but do a wise thing. The book of Proverbs is all about this. It is written parents to children. What is it we're supposed to tell our children to do and to act wisely? And for the author of Proverbs, to act wisely is to walk in God's righteous ways, to live life the right way, the way God designed it to be. And sometimes it's corrective. So corrective doesn't mean when that kid gets annoying to level 7, between 7 and 8, that's when we pull out, the discipline rod, and that's when we correct. Um, Children shouldn't be corrected for being annoying. It may be frustrating,
I-
maybe
Sure.
inconvenience,
Because I'll let you finish your thought.
but correction should happen when they're doing something immoral. If they are breaking God's commandments, if they are doing wrong when they should be doing right, that should be corrected. Now, if they spill their milk because they were moving their elbows too fast, they don't need a spanking for that. They need to be corrected and say, this is the right way to do it. And please don't put your cup next to the edge of the table. You know what I'm talking about. Every father knows what I'm talking about. But they haven't done an immoral thing. What happens when they have done an immoral thing is when they said, Dad told you to put your cup here, and you deliberately didn't put it there. Now, absent-mindedness is not immorality, but it is a problem.
That must be fixed.
And there are those moments. Now, we don't spank our children for everything they do wrong. However, they do receive spankings. Absolutely. Um, but it's after formative discipline has been rebelled against in very obvious ways, and they know that that is a possibility. They know it when we say, if you do this, the result will be corporal punishment of some kind, and they know that. And when I follow through, they really know it.
Yep. So they know that actions have consequences. I'm sure there's a father watching this right now thinking, easy for you to say, but my realities are my kids are lonely. They are being subject to racist treatment, overtly and covertly,
Mhm.
and I'm feeling out of place. Do you have any word of encouragement for such a parent?
Hmm. It was a while back ago now. I was introduced to a gentleman by the name of Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington was born into a slave household. His parents were slaves. He was a slave. in the southeastern United States. And as a boy, the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln was issued, and uh, and their lives changed radically. It wasn't a night and day shift, but he grew up in a different world than his parents did, uh, as a quasi-free man, but all the while very aware of his need for two things: education and the ability to make a life for himself in the midst of being out of place. Now, I am not black, obviously, but I know what it feels like to be out of place. Maybe not in the same way, but the feeling of saying, I don't fit here. I know how that feels, and it feels pretty awful a lot of the time. Booker T. Washington knew what that felt like, and he knew what it felt like for his people. And he went on to be able to get an education, even a university education, and he founded a school where people who'd grown up in the world of being slaves could come and get an education and learn a trade and a skill. And it wasn't just making jewelry or little trinkets to be sold on the streets. They got into the business of everything so that they could not just sell it and provide for the school, but so they could provide for themselves. Everything they ate at the school, they grew at the school.
Right.
The buildings of the school are buildings they built. Not only did they learn to kiln their own bricks, they became the best brick makers around. And so the town was buying their bricks because they were the best. He said it's not just about getting education and learning how to do this. It's doing it really well. Booker T. Washington was also a believer. He said we do this not just to survive, but we do this for the glory of God. He went on to meet people all over Europe and otherwise because he was this model of one who went from nothing and was able to do so much, not just for himself, but for his community, for people who were out of place. So I'm trying to draw back to your original question.
Yeah.
What do we do with kids who feel out of place? You help them see you can still contribute in amazing ways, not just so that you feel better, but if you can do well with what God has given you, and I think you can because it was God who gave it to you. If you take what He's given you and trust Him with it and say, God, I want to do all that I can to help thrive, to make your glory seen in the world, I think every third culture kid can do that. And as a father, you can help them do that by saying, God has gifted you. He's given you something. Let's use it for His glory and see what God does.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for this. And I hope to have a conversation with you again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.